A grid down situation is probably the most existentially threatening event we can imagine, and that's what I want to talk about today. Welcome to Integrative Preparedness. I'm Steve Smith, and the reason that I want to talk about this is because a video that I saw from Canadian Prepper just put out, I think yesterday. There's two of them that he's put out, and he interviewed a guy, Jonathan Hollerman, who is Peter Vincent Pry's protege. Pry passed some time ago. He was the godfather of EMP information, if you're not familiar with it. You know, most people are not, and this is the danger. Most people are not even aware of the possibility of EMP or CME, coronal mass ejection. If you're new to this, EMP stands for electromagnetic pulse, and CME for coronal mass ejection, which is the result of solar flares, sun eruptions. EMP actually can come from nuclear detonation high in the altitude. I won't get into that because most of you watching this channel already know about it. And if you don't know about it, we'll flesh it out a little bit later, or you can read my books. That's what my books are about. Or you can watch this video that I'm going to post from Canadian Prepper. I will post it not here, but as I always do when I talk about something, when I put this video on the Patreon channel, I will put the link to CP's video down below so that you can hit it and watch it yourself. It's a very good interview. And Hollerman, I wrote this down because so I wouldn't forget his title. He's the Deputy Executive Director of the EMP Task Force on National and Homeland Security. He knows what he's talking about. There's only a couple of things that I saw in there about which I would disagree with him. And one of those is that he makes the statement that in the event of an EMP or the grid going down, it would mean lights out for everyone in the affected area. He doesn't say that, but I always say this, in the affected area, which if the United States was the target, would be the United States or Canada or Australia or Europe or whatever, that it would be down for up to 2 years. I take a little bit of issue with that, and later on in the first interview that he does, he kind of comes around and explains, he fleshes that out a little bit further, but because he comes at it from a very dry scientific background, he doesn't give it the impact that it deserves, and so I want to do that now. If you're wondering, by the way, who is this guy sitting around disagreeing with an EMP or a grid down expert? Well, I'm the guy that wrote the Stonemont series, if you're new to this. The Stonemont series is all about, that's exactly what it's about, and it's about preparing for, surviving, and rebuilding after a total collapse of everything as a result of a CME. I'll tell you how to get those later if you're interested. So that's where I come from. What I want to disagree with him about is there's this idea, and it's not really a disagreement, it's a further explanation. This idea that it would be up to 2 years to replace the transformers that are necessary. Let me explain this for those who are not familiar with this or are not as familiar with it as they should be. And I'm aware many prepper channels make videos about EMP because it is the existential threat. Most of them don't really understand what it is, haven't thought about it a lot, and it's not that they wouldn't be capable. This just happens to be my particular area of interest and expertise, to whereas other people show you how to make fires and things like that, and build lean-tos and camp in the woods and stuff like that. But the truth of the matter is that the EMP Commission, clear back in the early 2000s, after 2001, 2, something like that, estimated that there would be a 90% die-off in the affected area within the first 12 months. Matter of fact, in the in the beginning of my second book, I'll just read this to you because I want to add something else to it. In my second book, The Revival, as an introduction to those people who may not be aware of it, it says, if a Carrington-class CME struck Earth today, okay, Carrington-class refers to the Carrington event in 1859, it would destroy all electrical grids and electronic components worldwide. Now, I'll explain that in a minute. We would immediately go back to a world without electricity. A nuclear-induced electromagnetic pulse, or EMP, which is called a HEMP, a high-altitude nuclear detonation, that we wouldn't feel, it wouldn't kill anybody, but it would have this effect. Would have the same effect in the target area. In either case, the EMP Commission estimates that 90% of those in affected areas would be dead within 1 year from starvation, disease, accidents, and the violence that accompanies societal collapse. How probable is this? Here's something to really consider. In their 2012 report, the American Geophysical Union projected a 12% chance that a Carrington-class CME would strike the Earth within the next decade. The chance of a nuclear-induced EMP attack from one of our global enemies, we have no way to know. That's from the preface that I wrote in my second book, The Revival. So when they say that, well, it's going to be up to 2 years to replace this, well, okay, 90% of the people, and I don't dispute this, I think there's no reason for me to dispute it when I think about it. Yeah, I think it's probably right. It might be higher than 90% of a die-off. But 2 years out you still have 90% of the people dead. And then, so who is going to be installing all these things, right? And now that assumes that other people, because these big transformers, and there are 3 grids in the United States, if you're not aware, Eastern, Western, and Texas. And it would not be difficult to take them out with simple nuclear devices on Scud missiles, or one coming out of the Gulf of Mexico. We really aren't hardened against that. We aren't protected against that. And Hollerman does a very good job. He gets into a lot of detail. The interview, the first one, is about an hour long. I certainly suggest you watch it. But these things, these big transformers, we don't make them here. They're made in Germany and South Korea. And so thinking that we can get replacements, even now, if we need to replace one, it takes up to 2 years to get one, to order it, because they have to be special ordered according to the particular destination and the needs of that area, to order it and get it over to our country. And then it takes an additional time to get it trucked and installed. So we're talking 2 to 3 years in the best of times. So this idea that, well, would it be without electricity for up to 2 years? No, I would disagree with that. We would be without electricity, and that's assuming that Europe, Germany, South Korea are still functioning. If there were an EMP attack against us, I would imagine that those allies of ours would also receive attacks to shut down. And if they were, who are they going to supply first? They're going to supply themselves. So what I tell people is, I think you could probably count on 10 years, but maybe longer than that, because we have to essentially rebuild manufacturing. Okay. Now, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. And here's one thing that a lot of people get wrong. They say, if we were hit with a CME or EMP, I'll tell you the difference in a minute. And it's kind of an important difference. We would be back to the Stone Ages or the Dark Ages. No, we wouldn't. We'd be back to, pre-electricity. We'd be back to the 1840s. And, people lived good lives in the 1840s, but the technology we have today, the infrastructure we have today, is the result of, so many innovations, so many inventions, and then innovations and applications and discovery of new knowledge, that we don't have to rediscover everything. We have the knowledge. It would be a matter of rebuilding industry infrastructure such as that. Okay? So, I mean, how long does that take? I don't know. It takes another 10 years. However, this is why my books are about. Oh, maybe I should hold them up. It's the Stone Mount series, as I showed you. It's 6 novels that I started. The first one in 2017, The Reversion, The Revival, The Renewal, An Appeal to Heaven, The Blessings of Freedom, and Hostages to Fortune. It's the complete plan on a preparing for, surviving, and rebuilding after one of these events, which we are assured by scientists. If you remember the 12% given by the Geophysical Union, we are pretty much assured that we are going to experience that. Okay. Now, the difference, let me throw this in real quickly here before we get to preparing for it. The difference is that there are 3 waves that come out of these things: E1, E2, and E3. E2 is not really the concern. E1, which is contained within an EMP, electromagnetic pulse, a HEMP, or something like that. E1 is the flash that takes out all of the circuits, all the mini circuits. And there's argument about this, but realize that this is theoretical. There was a situation, Starfish Prime, if you just go Google that, from which they get a lot of information. And then there was a situation in Quebec some years ago that where much of their grid was down as a result of a CME, a coronal mass ejection, that just affected a localized area, not the entire country. But a lot of this is theoretical. So, people will get on and argue about, well, that's not really right, from something that they read or whatever. But basically, it's best to assume this, that the E1 will take out all small, electronics. It take out your phone, your toaster, your computer, your laptop, your TVs, and your car. If you got a lot of computer chips in it. E2 not particularly concerning. E3 is what comes along several minutes later that essentially takes out all the long lines. The power lines act as a super antenna. The electromagnetic force travels through those and blows the transmitters. Now, a CME slightly different. It does not contain that E1. Okay, so a coronal mass ejection from the sun would not necessarily take out your cell phone or your laptop, but it would take out the infrastructure on which those devices rely. Does that make sense? So it doesn't really matter. You might your cell phone, you might still be able to play Candy Crush. I don't know. If that's an app or whatever, you might still be able to access your phone directory in there, but you wouldn't be able to call anybody because that infrastructure is down. Okay, your car might still run, but it's only going to run as long as you have gasoline for it, because the gas pumps are down because they've been affected by that E3. Does that make sense? Okay, we can get really into the weeds on this, but I would suggest you watch Canadian Prepper's interview of Harman, because he does a great job. And as a matter of fact, I've watched the first one. There was a follow-up to it that I haven't watched yet. Once I watch it, excuse me, I will either attach it to on the Patreon channel. I don't do it on the YouTube channel, but for our Patreon members, I'll put the link to it down there. I might save it because I think I'm going to do a follow-up on this, because people are always interested on what my triggers are to do certain things. And so to keep these in a manageable length here, I think I'll save that for a follow-up one here. But preparing for a grid down situation. Now we're talking EMP and CME. Could be cyber, could be physical attacks. All of those could have the same result. Okay, so you are without power, you are without electricity for potentially years, because even under a cyber attack or under a physical attack, the cascading effect of taking down a number of the transformers can take everything out. So anyway, you have to realize, and I would suggest that you share this with as many people as you possibly can, simply because talk to people who aren't into preparedness. And you'll find that the vast majority, hardly anybody out there is aware of this. And if you care about somebody, you ought to share this with them, and you can do it by sending this video and say, here's some crazy guy, I don't know, but, listen to what he says. And encourage them to be prepared for this. What it means is, here you are in a world without light, without heat, without air conditioning, without fuel, without police protection, without fire protection, without medical services, without anything that you don't provide for yourself, without food delivery. There is no food coming in. There are no trucks running. There is nothing. There is no resupply after your local Piggly Wiggly or whatever, or Kroger or whatever, after they have been swarmed over the first 2 days and they're empty of food. There is no more food coming. And so the food you're going to have is the food that you have stored. The water that you will have is the water you have stored, or the water that you're able to process. And hopefully you have a redundant system of water purification, whether that's Berkey or Sawyer or on and on, reverse osmosis, whatever. Your ability to purify water, there is no life without water. And after a few weeks, there is no life without food. It depends on how much you personally have stored. And then, different people, the government will say store up to a month of food or 2 months, I forget. They've changed over the years. Other people will say 6 months, other people will say a year. If you're new to me, I always say 7 years. There's reasons for that I won't get into right now. But the reason, the purpose of your stored food is to enable you to stay alive until you can produce all your own food. Okay? That means food production. That means gardening. That means farming. That means ranching. Okay? And this is why so many people are going to die, because they don't have the ability to do that. First off, most people don't have food stored. After I see the average family could live for a week, on the food that they have in the cupboard, and then that's getting down to the ketchup packets that were shoved in the back of the junk drawer. And then it's over. And then that's why you have, the beginning of real problems. When you get people starting to starve and their children are starving, this is where societal collapse really begins. And I'm going to address my thoughts on how to handle that in the follow-up. Maybe, I don't know if I'll shoot it later today or tomorrow, but we can get really detailed on that. So realize it means that until manufacturing is reestablished, you don't have any lights. You don't have anything that you don't provide for yourself, you or your group or your community or whatever. And of course, the larger your community, unless they're very tight within the community, that's also where the problems come from. Okay, not just outside people, but inside people. That can be problems. One of the things that I do in my book, one of the many things that I share in my book is the stone knot. I'll tell you a little bit about what the story is about. It's about a family, a prepared family. The reason that I wrote it is because I read a couple of other books. One that everybody's familiar with, One Second After, and then some others. And I was taken by the fact that they were all very negative, and that these were unprepared people, didn't know what to do, just kind of scrambled along, and they were very depressing, and rightfully so. That's what's going to happen with many people. But the thing is that there are prepared people, and I decided to write it from the standpoint of a prepared family. Now, the prepared family in the Stone Knot series, the Wyatts, it's a family who, as a result of their preparedness and their understanding of what could happen, were not only able to continue living a quality life, but were able to help other people. As other people came to them or were brought to them, they were able to help them and then start rebuilding community. People need community. The idea of the lone wolf, the Jeremiah Johnson who's going to go out and live in the woods or the mountains or whatever, it's amazingly difficult to support yourself in mountains. It's easier in the desert. Many people don't realize that. Uh, but that's a misnomer. One in a million people are going to do that. The average person is not, and especially if you have a family. I talk about one of the characters in here is a retired Marine that was almost to the point where he was going to try to take his family out and live in the woods after all their stores were depleted until he ran into Stonemont and then became a part of the Stonemont community. Community is so important, and I've done other videos on that, but community is so important. This is why it's important that you share this information with friends and with family and kind of get the feeling of who's feeling what so that you know who's there, who you can depend on. But so I wrote this as a positive. As a matter of fact, in the introduction to the first book, The Reversion, John Middleton calls it a unbelievably or a surprising, something like a surprisingly positive approach to an unbelievably negative situation. Well, it is going to be an unbelievably negative situation, but it's going to be totally different for the prepared than it is for the unprepared. And so that's why I wrote the book, the first one, The Reversion. That's why I wrote it, to show how preparedness can not only help you, but allow you to help others, and then rebuild community. And I talk about, I put a lot of history in there. I put a lot of, not really politics, but in a way politics, government, how government should work, how our country fell apart, why, the governmental policies that brought our country down. And how, it's about structuring things, again, right, based on the family and based on family preparedness. So in order to be ready for these things, and these are not just possibilities, and that's what people need to realize. These aren't just possibilities, these are probabilities. I hate the old saw, it's not a matter of if, it's when, but that's true in this case. And, both a study of human nature, a study of nations, an understanding of what's going on in the world now, and a reliance on the scientists who assure us that this is going to happen. I think we have to assume a position of expectation for this and then get busy on preparing for it. Now, if you're not, this goes into so many things. Like I said, food, clothing, defense, shelter. If your vehicles are running, mobility. Do you want to stay in this where you are, or do you need to get somewhere else? And do you know where that somewhere else is? And are you able to sustain yourself at that other location? These are things I'll be getting into more in the follow-up, kind of explaining. I'm not going to explain in detail what my plans are, but I'll give you an idea, an overview of it from which you can take, some clues and some direction for your own if you would like. But you are a standalone at that point. You and your family, or if you have a few friends, you are standing alone against the rest of the world. And there are no lights coming back on within the lifespan of 90% of the affected area. Okay, even within 2 years, like they say. And beyond that, I think, and I talk about this in my books, the rise of warlords, the rise of slavery, the rise of cannibalism. All of these things are going to be developing over this period of time. And you're going to have groups that survive. And some of those groups are going to be good folks, and some of them are not going to be. Some of those groups are going to be a secondary existential threat against the good people. And it's important that people understand this and realize it, or realize and then understand it, and then